Welcome to another exciting edition of the ESQ Practical Lawyers Academy webinar series. We are glad you could join us here today. My name is Chidima Abu and I am a Research and Development Associate at ESQ Trainings Limited. At ESQ Trainings Limited, our mission is to expand the frontiers of continuous professional learning in courses and training across various areas of practice. We have tagged this webinar series the Lunch Hour webinar series as they are slated to hold at 1 p.m. during lunch break. They hold 3 times every week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. However, in order to accommodate our Muslim participants, the Friday webinars will hold at 11. And after every session, we will provide resources in easily accessible formats for everyone who is interested. Presently, our training on mining, agreements, contracts, and transaction issues is going to start on the 19th to 23rd of April, and it goes for just 100,000 naira. Also, our 5 weeks training on the mechanics of oil and gas contracts runs through 22nd of April to 20th of May, and it goes for 200,000 naira. So for those that are interested, please message me in the chat session. And to those who missed our webinar on Friday, which was held on Friday on the topic running your law firm as a business, you can watch that particular webinar that I held last Friday on our YouTube, which the link will be put on the chat session, and watch it. And please, we would love if you subscribe to our YouTube channel for more and more such premium content. Thank you. So the topic of today's webinar is on rights of children and women in crisis areas, and some of the things that will be discussed today is to highlight the role of society, communities, and families to promote and protect children's rights. Also promote an international system of solidarity designed to achieve the realization of children's rights. This webinar will also be reaffirming that all rights are equally important and essential for the full development of a child, and that each and every child is very important, and many more content I'll discuss today. So if you have any questions while this webinar is ongoing, please type in the Q&A or raise your hand raise your hand, and in due time it will be answered. So with this, I would love to introduce our speakers for today, those around and those that will still be joining us shortly. So we have our speaker, Monday Ubani. He's the principal partner at Ubani & Co. We also have GT Ogunye. He's the principal counsel at GT Ogunye Chambers. We have Nkechi Oyenso. She's a facilitator of the Governance and Institution Policy Commission, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. We have Taiwo Akinlami. He is the UN consultant and founder and principal of the Taiwo Akinlami Child Protection Academy. We have Cordelia AK, and yes, we have Cordelia AK. She's the assistant director of at Rivers State Ministry of Justice. Our moderator is Mrs. Tosin Solanke, administrator and head of legal at ESQ Training, ESQ Practical Lawyers Academy. She's also vast and experienced in litigation, real estate, company and commercial contracts, and she's also the head of training in ESQ Practical Lawyers Academy. So, Ms. Tosin, thank you today for joining us. And with this very brief intro, I'll leave you to moderate the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chidima, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Like Chidima already mentioned, the topic of today's webinar is rights of children and women in crisis. So basically, our panel today will be looking at, the rights of women, children in times of crisis. We all know that when there is a conflict or when there's a disaster, children and women are the most vulnerable, and thereby they suffer the first and then they also suffer the most. And we also know that during emergencies and humanitarian crises, children and women, they are the ones who are especially prone to disease, to malnutrition, hardships, and violence. So, it's even worse where these children are in conflict areas, they are likely to be in extreme poverty. They don't have access to basic education. There's no security of life. They don't have access to good nutrition and many other things like that. Even kidnappings in such areas, it becomes a thing of, children and women are the most vulnerable to such occurrences. So those are the things that we'll be looking at in today's webinar. Our panel today consists of first on my list, I have Mr. Monday Ubani. He's the principal partner at Ubani & Co. He was former chairman of the biggest branch of the Nigerian Bar Association, the Ikeja. That's between 2012 and 2014. He's a social critic, a political activist, a community leader, and commentator on national issues. Mr. Ubani is a courageous human rights activist, he's a philanthropist. He is the founder and president of Onyekachi Ubani Foundation. He has been praised from many sectors for fighting for Nigerian people whose rights and voices were trampled, upon. He has been at the forefront of fighting for the rights of the ordinary citizens. And all this has been made possible through his foundation, where he has rendered, countless services to humanity. And he's also a mentor to many young Nigerians. He has been involved in many youth development projects and mentorship programs. He was also instrumental to the establishment of Abia Rejoice movement for youth, which is a platform that helps to discover, develop, and deploy young creative Abians for economic development of their communities. And it is also targeted at finding solutions to problems of poverty, building human, social, financial, and environmental assets that enables youths and communities to exert control over their lives and participate in building community prosperity in meaningful, effective ways. Mr. Ubani, you are welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you, Tosi. That was very elaborate. I appreciate you.
Okay, sir. All right, so I'll also go ahead to introduce Mr. Taiwo Akinlami. He's a United Nations consultant, as well as the founder of Taiwo Akinlami Academy, which is Africa's pioneer child protection academy. He's a child protection thinker and practitioner, and has been involved in many major legal drafting and curriculum development on matters that relate to children's rights, including serving on the committee of erudite professionals charged with pioneering responsibility of mainstreaming children's rights education into the curriculum of the Nigerian Institute of Journalism, jointly sponsored by UNICEF and the Federal Ministry of Information. It facilitates and consults for UNICEF and has in the last 10 years traversed the nooks and crannies of Nigeria to educate children, young people, and adults of diverse interests on the Child Rights Act. So he's a consultant, he's a researcher, a facilitator, he's a mediator, he's a social intervention content provider, he's an active contributor to brainstorming and planning sessions, and he's also a child youth trainer. Mr. Taiwo Akinlami, you are welcome to today's webinar session.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure being with you today.
Okay, so I move on to the next. Okay, so I will introduce now Mrs. Nkechi Onyeso. She is a managing director of Pathfinders International Limited. She has over 2 decades of experience in corporate litigation practice, advising and working in various sectors, including non-governmental organizations, aviation, corporate law, labor relations, negotiations, human resources, and administration, corporate governance and compliance. She was the first female registrar and chief executive officer of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, as the ICSAM. She is currently the managing director of Pathfinders International Limited and the facilitator of the Governance and Institutions Policy Commission of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG. Mrs. Onyeso, you are welcome to today's panel.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I will introduce now Mrs. Cordelia Ike. She is the Assistant Director of Public Prosecutions, Rivers State Ministry of Justice. She is a past General Secretary of the ECMDA. She is the coordinator of the African Women Lawyers Association of Nigeria, Rivers State Chapter. She's the first female secretary of the Nigerian Bar Association Port Harcourt branch. She's also the secretary of the AFPA Women's Forum. She was former council member of the NBA Human Rights Institute and the past chairman of the Law Officers Association of Nigeria, Rivers State Chapter, as well as a former publicity secretary of the NBA Port Harcourt branch. She's experienced in criminal justice and ADR practice. She's skilled in legal writing and research. She has expertise in public international law, and she's very passionate about gender and child's rights advocacy, which she does with demonstrated leadership qualities and with a passion for training and mentoring. Mrs. Eke, you are welcome to today's panel. We are very glad that you were able to join us today. And okay, we have one more panelist, Mr. GT Ogunye, although he's not here yet, but I'll just go ahead to introduce him pending when he comes back. So Mr. GT Ogunye is the principal counsel at GT Ogunye Chambers. He's a leading public interest lawyer, a publicist, legal commentator, author, and essayist. His career in the legal profession has been intertwined with human rights, pro-democracy, and legal bar activism. He was a member of the Campaign for Democracy, which was a vibrant coalition of human rights and civil society organizations, and was also a member of the Central Committee of the, which organized and executed a series of anti-military protests and greeted the annulment of the June 12, 1993 presidential election. He was also a member of the Joint Action Committee of Nigeria that was led by Chief Ganifa Emi, late Chief Ganifa Emi, SAM. He's a consultant to Civil Rights Congress, Female Leadership Forum, and other NGOs. Since 1999, he has been contributing to the promotion of the rule of law and constitutional governance in Nigeria. So I believe you'll be joining us in the course of the webinar. So we are happy to have this panel of very intelligent and well-experienced speakers. And at this point, I think I will invite Mr. Monde Ubani to make his quick presentation, and then we'll take it up from there.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for, as I said earlier, you have succeeded in introducing every person, and the personalities you have introduced are wonderful local and international certified speakers. I think the panel is very rich. I want to go straight ahead with my presentation because there is not much time left. The topic that I've been assigned to do or speak on is rights of the children and women in crisis. What I intend to do with this paper is to define when we're in crisis at any point in time, and if we're, do societies respect rights of women and children during the time of crisis? Are there legal instruments or treaties or resolutions, either by international bodies or even by local laws, statutes that guarantees the right of these set of people who are known to be very vulnerable in society? And what are we expecting the society to do actually in times of crisis for this set of people, children and women? Very important. So this is where I will concentrate on my paper, and I have something that I have put down. If you, with the kind permission of this panel, I want to speak to my paper that I have written for this particular lecture. Now, let's define what crisis is. It's defined as unexpected event or period that will lead or may lead to what we call unstable or dangerous situation that naturally affect individual or group of persons or in a society. I'm talking about crisis now. Crisis are negative changes which occur in human or environmental affairs of women, especially when they occur in a manner that is clearly sudden, with little or no warning. Now, crises bring about what we call complex emergencies that occur as a result of several factors or events that prevent large group of persons from accessing what we call the fundamental needs, such as food, water, clean water, or even shelter. Common example of crisis includes armed conflict. It's important we note those things we call crises in any society: armed conflict, tribal wars, insurgency, epidemics, natural disasters, and other major emergencies in humanitarian context. Of course, recently we have graduated into kidnapping, abduction of our children in schools. Is the current one that happened is in I think Kaduna State. If you are watching keenly on the television, you'll be seeing women and men crying for the safe return of their children that were abducted recently in Kaduna. Now, in crisis, women and children, they are the ones that suffer first and suffer the most as a result of their being vulnerable. This paper seeks to actually highlight the rights of women and children in crisis, and then the importance of their safety. And we must pay attention to that. Any society that will be regarded as a humane society or a civilized society, is clearly dependent upon the level of attention it pays to these vulnerable set of beings, whether in normal times or even in crisis time, is important. Any society that is humane, any society that is known as civilized, will be judged based upon the kind of attention it pays to these vulnerable. And I want to also appreciate the organizers of this program for bringing out this topic. That these are topics that you don't see often, being used as a topic for discussion. But for these particular organizers, I say kudos. Now, children and women living in crisis, they are human beings. So the issues: do they have rights? Have they lost their humanity because of the fact that we're now in crisis period? Are they supposed to be protected by the society? So children and women living in crisis are human beings, and not in any way excluded from persons whose human rights are guaranteed by our statute. It's important we define those rights. Freedom of movement, they are known as very much inalienable and human in being, simply by the fact of their being a human being. First and foremost, you are entitled to those rights. As I said earlier, those rights include right to life, dignity of persons, personal liberty, freedom of movement. There are so many of them that these particular statutes I have mentioned, this particular article provides for. Now, in Nigeria, for instance, if you go to Chapter 4 of our 1999 Constitution as amended, it guarantees the fundamental right accruing to every citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, including our women and children, even under normal and crisis period. Now, the United Nations in December 16, 1966, through their General Assembly, adopted what they call International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Now, it's a multilateral treaty which came into force on 3rd of January, 1976, and it provides for the following rights: the right to education, the right to an adequate standard of living, including food, clothing, and housing, the right to work and to favorable conditions of work, just to mention a few. These rights are easily suspended during crisis, as a good number of children and women are displaced without any homestead and cannot boast of a minimum standard of living, not to talk of adequate standard of living. Women and children are often abducted, as has been the case in Nigeria in recent time, and often subjected to what you call long compulsory hours of hard labor by their captors under unfavorable extreme weather conditions. In some severe cases, children who have not attained the official adolescent age of 18 are often recruited forcefully to serve as insurgents. They are used as there was a time they were using them to blow up people in the northern region. And very unfortunate, some of them are conscripted, they are under some of them under 10 years. And then they use them to fight for criminal militias, bandits, and even terrorists. That is actually what is going on presently in Nigeria. Now, women rights in crisis. Do they have rights when we have crisis period? despite the fact that international laws guarantee women and men equal rights in the enjoyment of human rights. Crises such as armed conflict, as I said earlier, tribal wars, insurgency, and natural disaster often exacerbate discrimination and inequalities. It rather increases inequality, increases discrimination, which the Constitution itself forbids. But under crisis time, women are not regarded, children are not regarded, they are not given their full right as the law itself has provided for. But if you look at Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that was adopted in 1979, it reinforces the provision of existing international instruments aiming at elimination of discrimination against women and achieve what we call gender equality. Now, that law does not address the issue of gender-based violence anyway against women, and which is often widespread, during time of crisis, where women are often victims of acts that inflict physical, mental, and sexual harm or suffering, or threats of such acts, coercion, and other deprivation. Of course, some of us are aware of a lady called Lady Shaibu. This lady, Leah Shaibu, that has been abducted for over 2 years now, and she has been in custody of these insurgents, and they have actually sexually abused that girl. The last news we heard about her is that she has given birth to another baby. That was the issue of baby last year, and this year again she has given birth to another baby. I mean, you can imagine the condition of this girl. There was no marriage. There was not any proper proposal to the parents, oh, we want to marry this girl. But she refused to denounce her religious belief. And because of that, these people have kept this girl in custody and in captivity, and then sexually abusing her daily. You can imagine what this girl is passing through in times of trauma. And the society has actually forgotten her. And the federal government has made several promises to the parents. Oh, we're going to get this girl back. We will get her back. Up to now, nothing has been done. The last news we heard about her is another baby. She keep on producing babies and being assaulted daily by these hoodlums who have taken captive of that girl. So you can imagine the trauma, the kind of experience this young girl is passing through. I don't know how you can even use psychology in order to get her back to humanity when she's recovered. It's as bad as that. Now, Article 12 obliges governments to ensure non-discriminatory access to health care, especially for vulnerable marginalized groups. The right to health includes an obligation to protect women and children and girls from violence. Violations of this right to health includes the failure to regulate the activities of individuals and groups that violate the right of others, and the failure to protect women against sexual violence or to prosecute the perpetrators of such a crime. Now, the people that have taken that layer, Our Lady, up to now, nobody has actually, they have not been caught and they have not been prosecuted. Now, recently, news from southwestern Nigeria, which is another sad news, had it that killer herdsmen invaded farming communities in Ondo and Oyo states, killing several people, destroying their farmland, and then raping our women. In fact, that is the new style now. They not only assault those who own farms, they also, most women who are farmers have become victims of rape by these criminally minded individuals in our society. So our women are clearly exposed. It is clearly disheartening to know that to date, the federal government has not gone after those alleged killer herdsmen to prosecute them in a bid to establish their innocence or guilt. In addition to the human rights abuses, treaties we're talking about, several United Nations resolutions and world conferences have sought to strengthen the protection of women's rights and children. These include the 1999 World Conference on Human Rights, which affirmed the universality of women's rights as human rights, stressed the importance of eliminating violence against our women, especially violence against women during armed conflicts or crises, which is what we're emphasizing in this particular paper. Now, the United Nations Security Council resolution of which we call 1325 of year 2000 also reiterated the fact that civilians, particularly women and children, account for a vast majority of those negatively affected by conflict. And then those resolutions call for measures to ensure that women are more equally represented even during the time of peace process. No, women who are victims, because who wears the shoe where it pinches, should be involved in any peace process to resolve this particular conflict that always affects women and children. So the issue of adequacy of women in representing in all those panels or any of these organizational institutions to resolve how women should be protected. The recommendation is that women should be involved in all that process. Now, the council called on all parties to armed conflict to fully respect internal laws applicable to the rights and protection of civilian women and children. The council further cautioned all parties to armed conflict to bear in mind the relevant provision of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which explicitly recognized that under specified circumstances, sexual offenses or violence constitutes an international crime. What has been done to that lady called Shahid is clearly a crime against humanity. And those people, at any point in time they are caught, should be taken to ICC, for trial, because it's clearly a crime against humanity. Now, what of our children? What are their rights? Are there any statutes? Are there provisions of the law, both international and local, that actually provides their protection? We said that there is one. The Convention of the Rights of the Child provides a comprehensive framework of children's rights as well as mechanisms of accountability. The Convention recognizes children's right to be free from all forms of abuse, neglect, sexual exploitation, trafficking, abduction, torture, deprivation of liberty, and other forms of maltreatment at all times. The key word is at all times. It further provides for special protection during times of conflict for our children. Now, in addition, there is International Law Organization Convention 182, which declares that a child sojourning to be one of the worst forms of child labor. That's recruitment of kids as armed soldiers is a worst form of child labor and prohibits forced or compulsory recruitment of children under the age of 18 in armed conflict. The optional protocol to the Convention of the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict sets 18 as the age limit for compulsory involvement of children in armed conflict. Now, if you want to recruit them, they must be up to 18 for them to participate in any form of hostility. Now, the optional protocol also requires that the state actors shall provide all appropriate assistance to children for their physical and psychological recovery and social reintegration after the wartime. Now, this instrument, together with the relevant provisions of the Geneva Convention, the Genocide Convention, and the 1951 Refugee Convention, the 1967 Protocol protecting refugee children, and several Security Council resolutions, establishes a United Nations monitoring mechanism on the use of child soldiers and other violations against children. So you can see all manner of laws that have been enacted by international bodies in order to protect our children. Now, narrowing it down to Nigeria. Nigeria specifically is protected, the Nigerian child is protected by the Child Rights Act, which was enacted by the federal government of Nigeria in December 2003. Now, that legislation was adopted to implement principles that are enshrined in all those international instruments I have highlighted earlier on, including the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child and the 1990 African Union Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which Nigeria ratified in 1991 and 2000 respectively. There are so many legal instruments, as I said earlier, that protects our children, which Nigeria have become a signatory, have ratified. But the Child Rights Act was enacted in 2003 in order to give effect to all those ratifications and provide extensive protection for our children in conflict situations and prohibits child labor, sexual abuse, and exploitation of children. That is the main provision of that particular Nigerian Child Rights Act. Now, child betrothal, marrying children very early, and then marrying them when they are not up to age. Now, the greatest threat to this act, however, lies in our federal system of government. It's very important we note this. The greatest threat to this act lies in our federal system of government and constitutional structure, which gives exclusive legislative jurisdiction on matters affecting children to the constituent states. So even though this law has been enacted at the federal level, if the states that do not domesticate, that do not bring those laws and enact them by their state house of assembly, it will not become implementable. So it's not a law that is applicable to all the states of the federation. The states also have the responsibility, the onerous responsibility of enacting these laws by their state house of assembly and begin to implement what has been provided for in those laws. The twist in this equation makes the Federal Act clearly insufficient as a means to extend protection to all our children as it must be adopted by each state legislature for it to be applicable in all those states. So currently, what we're told is that 25 out of 36 states in Nigeria have localized the Child Rights Act. However, according to the United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, 11 northern states in Nigeria are yet to actually localize the Child Rights Act, and there are no records of discussion or debate about that particular law in their various legislative assemblies. These states include Bauchi, Yobe, Sokoto, Adamawa, Borno, Zamfara, Gombe, Katsina, Kebbi, Jigawa, Kano. Sadly, the states most hit by crisis in our current day Nigeria, the states that are most hit by the crisis in Nigeria are in the north. And one cannot help but ask, how are these our children and women protected from the raging banditry in Zamfara, the devastating insurgency in Maiduguri, and then the incessant kidnapping of school children that is occurring both in Niger State, Kaduna, and some other northern states. So the government's role is very important. We must emphasize the government role in protecting our children and our women during crisis period is very important. Now, protection of those rights in conflict areas is first and foremost the responsibility of the state. Basically speaking, children during crisis situation require 5 critical types of protection. 1, protection from physical harm, protection from exploitation and gender-based violence. Now, protection from family separation, protection from abuses related to forced displacement, and of course, finally, protection from denial of access to quality education. Most things I have highlighted is what our women and children are actually denied of under normal times, then let alone under crisis period. They are denied all that. Now, Boko Haram armed bandits and kidnappers are systematically undermining several key rights that are accruable to our wives and to our children and women, especially the right to education without discrimination and basic health care, both enshrined in the Child Rights Act and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. As I said earlier, you see how these women and children are usually being abducted in the northern region. The recent one is the one that happened in Kaduna. And I watched the parents, how they are in trauma. They are under stress that you send your children to go and acquire education. Somebody sees somewhere and begin to plan and say, we must disrupt the educational opportunities of these children. And the next thing they will do is to go and abduct them, and then they subject them to all manner of extreme human conditions. Beat them up, tie them, and then scaring other ones from going to school. So what they want to turn our children is that want to produce a nation of illiterates all over the world, all over the country, who will not be able to reason, who cannot be able to carry forward, the ideals of society, ideals of the country. That is what these guys have set out to do. And they are, putting fear. Even that fear now is probably coming down south. If people in the north, are no longer safe to send their children, what stops these guys from coming down south and scaring everyone and making sure that we now have children that will not go to school and we have, illiterate, nation? You can see the danger, that is actually accruing if the society does not rise up and stop the nonsense that is actually playing out. It is clearly something that is very scary. When people can no longer feel safe to go to school, when people are being scared from school, when children are no longer safe to go to school, or those who go and they are abducted and killed and their lives wasted. Nobody will want to send any of his kids to school anymore as a result of what is actually playing out recently. So basic primary education should be compulsory, which all of us are agreeing, available and free to all. We must ensure that. And that is what the federal government of Nigeria has not actually succeeded in doing. So few states have actually made education at the primary level to be compulsory, but many states are still, charging so much fees. Secondary education should also be available and accessible. However, it is not the case in some of these states you call Maiduguri is not there, Yobe, and most recently Katsina, Niger, and Zamfara, where the respective governors of the last 3 states recently ordered a temporary closure of schools in certain areas because of what I've just mentioned is happening in those states. Now, the international community's position in achieving the realization of women and children rights is what I want to discuss. What has been the position of the international community, especially with protection of women and children? It is unequivocally clear that the international community stands in total solidarity, and this is very cheery, in realizing the rights of men and women with children during crisis. Majority of the instruments, international laws, I have mentioned them, resolutions and declarations cited in this paper emanate from the United Nations. This instrument, together with the relevant provisions of the Geneva Conventions, the Genocide Convention, are all steps that are geared towards realization of the rights of women and that of our children. The United Nations, in a conference of 160 states on the 17th of July 1998, established the first treaty-based permanent international criminal court. Now, that treaty adopted during that conference is known as the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and it defines the most serious crimes of international concern to come under the ICC and classify rape and other forms of sexual violence, recruitment or use of children under the age of 18 into armed groups and attacks against schools as war crimes, and that is the Chilren news. Now, genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes that are often prevalent during crisis fall within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which can hold individuals criminally responsible and punishable for committing acts of amounting to this crime. So the good news is that all those offenses that are usually targeted against men and women, against children, come under crime against humanity and can be now tried as an individual. After the end of the crisis, they'll take you to Hague, and then you will be arraigned and tried for crime against humanity. Now, in conclusion, because it's important, I conclude this so that others can chip in their own contribution on this all-important topic. The Nigerian government has agreed to the obligation to protect the rights of women and children in crisis when it ratified all those treaties I have mentioned, all those international treaties, and they were part of the resolutions of UN too. And then most of them also have been domesticated in under Nigerian jurisdiction. Now, in order to meet these obligations, what we should insist is that the Nigerian government must ensure that Nigerian children and women are accessible and to effective remedies for any violation of this right through our judicial system. And our judicial system must be strong enough. In other words, if any of these rights have been violated by any institution, by anybody, by an individual, or by political actors at any point in time, the Nigerian government must develop a very strong system. Our judiciary must be strong enough to grant remedies for those categories of violations I have itemized. It's very important. The government should further put in appropriate policies and review by amending or enacting or repealing and ensure our national legislation is in conformity with international standards. That again is very important. To ensure that effective institutional framework, like having good policing system, our police, our judicial system, our prison system, must exist to protect these rights. International assistance is very important. And so there are so many things to be said about the rights of women under crisis, but as I said earlier, this is my just simple thought concerning this, that one, there are crises, especially in Nigeria now, that affect the rights of our women and children. But are there instruments protecting them? And I said, yes, there are so many instruments, both international and local. But we need to build institutions, in case these rights are violated, that there will be remedy for those who have become victims of violations of their rights. That again is very key. But everything revolves around governance and government. The government has a lot to do to protect our children and women. And if they don't have the political will, then it is also important we highlight it that this country is not a civilized country if our vulnerables are left to their own fate. Something has to be done particularly to protect them. That is my simple submission. So I rest my case, my lady.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wani, for that very rich presentation. And I said, okay, we quickly need to move on to other speakers so that we can maximize our time. And I would also appreciate if we can have the presentation within 10 minutes so that we can have discussions right after that. So I would invite Mrs. Nkechi Onyeso to go ahead with our presentation.
Thank you very much. My most respected senior and brother, Mr. Monday Ubani, and other distinguished speakers, good afternoon. I rest on all protocols that have already been established. Thank you so much for this webinar. This is indeed key for not only Nigeria, but indeed the world, because we have in the past year have experienced the crisis like never before. And we know that women and children suffer immensely during periods of crisis, be it wars, be it a pandemic like what we've just seen. During this period, they are prone, or I would say we are prone, because I'm a woman myself, we're prone to malnutrition, we're prone to abuse, exploitation, sexual violence, early marriage, lack of access to education, and discrimination, amongst the other things. Let's look at Nigeria, for example. Before the pandemic, we already had 10.5 million children out of school. It has been said that Nigeria has the largest number of children out of school. This is before the pandemic. So you and I are guessing the figures at a time like this. And we all know that we've had internally displaced people in Nigeria for a time. And I think as of last year, they were put at 1.9 million people that were displaced in Nigeria. And 60% of them are children. We find that a survey done in 2014 says that 6 out of 10 children have suffered some form of abuse before attaining the age of 18. And 70% of those that have been abused multiple times. And again, like my Leonard Senior has pointed out, Nigeria has the largest number of child brides in Africa. We are talking about 23 million women and girls that have been married off. And the issue with women and children in terms of crisis is not only in Africa. If you follow the news, even in America, one of the greatest challenges the Joe Biden administration is having now is with the surge of immigrants at the borders, mainly children. And you come back again to Nigeria, we have a report by BBC that lets us know that about 600 children have been adopted from school. So like Mr. Bani said, there seems to be a very, very intense approach to stop our children from going to school. Again, we'll see that since the lockdown, there has been a significant increase in gender-based violence in Nigeria, especially in Lagos, the FCT, and in Ogun State. And when we look at all this, it impacts us in various ways. Off my fingertips, the social economic impact will be a problem in achieving some of the 2030 agendas for sustainable development goals, specifically inclusion and equitable education, and goal 8 that has to do with also with inclusion and sustainable economic growth. Because where you have half of the population in Nigeria, for example, that have been abused or sidelined due to crisis, pandemics, wars, or however you would look at it, you know that we cannot grow as a country as we want to grow. Again, I wouldn't talk a lot about the Convention on the Rights of the Child because Mr. Bani has spoken extensively on it. I just want to highlight that that convention actually is guided by 4 beliefs: that children should not suffer discrimination. Interest must be the main concern. Children should have the right to survive and develop, and children should have their own views taken into account in matters that affect them. So it's not left for you and I to look and see how much of these beliefs have actually been actualized, even though Nigeria has ascended to this convention. In Nigeria specifically, we have the Child Right Act. Again, Mr. Bani has respectfully spoken about that. And it includes all the basic rights: the right to life, right to movement, right to discrimination, freedom from discrimination, dignity, health care, parental care, and things like that. And again, you and I who live in Nigeria, we know the position of that as relates to our children. As again, we've noted that only 24 out of 36 states have actually adopted the CRA as a state law. And we begin to wonder why. What is the hesitation with the rest of the states? What makes children so vulnerable? First of what comes to mind is that children are dependent on adults. And during times of crisis, most times they lose a parent, or they lose both parents. Or where there's strong economic implications, the parents actually just send these children off to other countries so that they pray that the children will have a better life there. So their children's life is largely dependent on the decision that their parents or an adult around them takes. And now that we have so much going on economically, especially after the pandemic, you find that lots of parents have lost their means of livelihood. So they are doing multiple jobs, multiple hours, and children are now left alone to take care of themselves more or less. And this makes the children more vulnerable to vices in the environment. And again, when parents lose their jobs or caretakers lose their sources of livelihood, it affects the child, because the first thing they do is stop education, cut down on healthy, balanced meals, and all this have implications for the child, and also makes the child feel insecure and anxious. So basically, how can we help? You and I can help by getting involved, like what you're doing. I really commend your law firm, getting involved to not brush the matter under the carpet, take responsibility, get our government to get involved, get more international organizations to get involved. And like we've said earlier, children should be given an opportunity to fully express their rights and their views in discussing legislature or any decision or policies that affect them. They should be able to participate and also give their own point of view in a controlled environment. And we must insist that our national and international leaders take the protection of women and children as top priority during times of crisis. We've seen, we don't have a lot of cases of children actually suing the government for their rights, because I sense that the government courts are seeing issues that have to do with children's rights as more of a legislature or a legislative thing, not as something that the courts can help implement. And we have seen, we have the Child Rights Act, but now how are we implementing it? There are various many challenges in the implementation. And of course, one of them has to do with having institutions set up. Of course, we have the National Human Rights Commission, but we need to have localized institutions set up that are solely empowered to curb the incidents of violence and violations of the rights of children and women. And again, we have to ensure that these institutions can effectively enforce this rights on behalf of the children. And they should be equipped. They should have all that it takes. They should have trained personnel, and they should have enough data. That's another important thing, to ensure that they're able to help to curb this. And all stakeholders, there's a lack of a concerted effort by all stakeholders. We have people working in silos in different groups, and we need to come together as a holistic group and see how we can help to address this, to ensure that the Child Rights Act is not an empty legislation, that it has, been given the arms and the legs to be able to do what it has essentially set out to do. So I would just like to close by saying one of the key things, again, to be looked into is the issue of some customs and practices that are discriminatory against women and also children. We have the issue of child marriages, which is something we really need to, is the elephant in the room, is something we really need to address and talk about and see how we can ensure that our girls are married at matured ages when they can take independent decisions for themselves. We also have to look at some of the pillars of corporate governance or governance in general, which is accountability and transparency. So to have this institution set up in a transparent way, so people can see, international organizations can see what exactly we're doing. They can follow the money trail to ensure that what is being put in for the women and the children actually get to the women and the children. We have to get to a point in our country where we are held accountable for what we say we are doing, not only to be seen to be doing it, but to actually be doing it. So I would rest there, and I will allow other speakers speak. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. Thank you so much for that. So I quickly move on to Mr. Taiwo Akinlami. So please go ahead with your presentation now. Thank you.
Please, thank you very much. Permit me to stand on existing protocol. My name is Taiwo Akinlami, not Akinlami, Akinlami. That's my name. I commend the presentations that have gone on from the erudite earlier speakers. They have shed light on the area of the law, which is critical, and the implementation of same, which is also very, very important. Because if we do not first understand the provisions of the law and how to implement those laws, all our efforts to build an egalitarian society will be in vain. People don't fight for the rights they don't know. And so I commend them for their presentation. Now, let me start by saying that Nigeria has been in crisis for so many years now. I am 51 years old, and I was born, when I was born, I was not born into an organized Nigeria. I was born into a disorganized Nigeria. I have spent 51 years in this country. I can't remember enjoying 24 hours electricity. I can't remember traveling on 1 kilometer road without potholes. I can't remember there's been a time where I've been able to educate all of our children, fend for all of our children. So Nigeria has been in crisis. Now, since this government assumed power, that is the Buhari government, since 2015, the crisis has been escalated, has been deepened, because Jonathan was said to be directionless. This one is said to be absent. And so it is not possible for us to discuss the rights of our children and our women without considering the state of the nation. As a matter of fact, the nation needs to be well before our children can be well. There's no nation where children are doing well or women are doing well that the nation, first of all, is not well. Go to Somalia. You can't talk about child's rights in Somalia. You can't talk about child rights in Somalia without talking about the state of Somalia. You can't talk about child's rights in Syria without talking about the state of Syria. You cannot talk about child's rights or women's rights in Yemen, in Central African Republic, all of these places that have become war-torn, without looking at the state of the nation. I think the greatest crisis, the greatest threat to the rights of children today and women is the state of our nation. And until we fix Nigeria, we cannot fix our children, because you see, you cannot dichotomize. You cannot say, once we solve the problem of children, the problem of Nigeria is solved. No, it is like a house that is sinking. You want to fix the bulb. It is like a house that is sinking. You want to fix the generator. A house is sinking, you want to fix the painting. You need to go to the root, the foundation. I think the crisis we are dealing with today is the crisis of a nation that has no respect for dignity of human persons, and it is very clear. And so when you look at the words of Dr. Nelson Mandela, Mandela made a categorical statement, which is very profound, which I want to start with. Mandela said there's no keener revelation of the soul of a nation than how it treats its children. So if you want to understand the soul of a nation, you look at how they treat their children. So when you look at that, you understand, first of all, that Nigeria is in crisis because you look at the particulars of crisis. Number one, 92 million Nigerians, according to Global Poverty Watch, are living on extreme poverty, ultra poverty, extreme poverty. 92 million living on less than $1.9 per day. Now, in this country, we are still practicing open defecation. In this country, 13.5 million Nigerian children were out of school before COVID. During COVID, 46 million could not access education, according to UNICEF. Not only that, 36 million people who wanted to access adult education could not access education, 36 million, which means 80 million Nigerians were out in the cold without access to education as a result of mismanagement of COVID, not COVID, because Nigeria was not the only country hit by COVID. COVID was not the problem. It was the mismanagement of COVID that led to crisis. In developed countries where they got their bearing right and they knew that life comes with its own vicissitudes, the COVID happened, but many things were in place to ensure that the people did not suffer the way we suffered here. and we are still suffering. So for me, Nigeria is in crisis. And the indices of crisis are some of the things that I've mentioned. So we must understand that our children, people say children and women are vulnerable. I don't agree. They are not vulnerable because God did not create anybody vulnerable. When you say children are vulnerable, I will only agree with you to the extent that you are saying that adults are irresponsible. If you say women are vulnerable, I will agree with you to the extent that those who are supposed to protect the rights of women are irresponsible. So what you call child vulnerability, I want to speak mainly for children, is adults' irresponsibility. Because anything that calls for protection, calls for action. Anything that calls for protection, calls for commitment. The house where I live can become vulnerable. If I open the door, I break down the gates. I refuse to put security measures in place. Anytime a crime is committed, it's because someone has dropped the ball. There's no crime without security breach. So for me, for a crime to be committed, there are three main ingredients that are available. Number one, there is a will to commit crime. Number two, there is an opportunity to commit crime. Number three, there is reward. Number two is the most critical thing when we talk about vulnerability of children and women. Now note that for Aso Rock to carry the highest money in Nigeria, that is, if you want to go into robbery, do one robbery and retire. You should go to Aso Rock. How come armed robbers don't go to Aso Rock? How come? They know the money is there, but they are not sure of what they will meet there. So they don't go there. And so people who abuse children, people who mess up children, who mess up with children, is because they know that they can get away with it, either from the scene of committing the crime or from the arms of the law reaching them. So children are not vulnerable, because I don't want us to say children are vulnerable as if God created children vulnerable. No, God created children to be protected. God created women to be protected. Because you see, if you say you have strength as a man, your strength as a man is not to devalue women. Your strength as a man should be to protect women. When you fail in that responsibility, it's not the woman that is vulnerable, it is you that is irresponsible. So for me, that's number one. Number two, when we talk about children, it is important for us to ask the question, which children are we talking about? Is it the children of words of wood and dross of water, the people that France for now call the wretched of the oi polloi? Or is it the children of the upper crust? You know, because you see, there is a dimension of conversation that has to put these matters where they belong. We can't talk about children generally in Nigeria. When you go to countries like Finland, Norway, all of those Scandinavian countries who have achieved what can be called egalitarian society, then you can talk about children generally on one premise, on one platform, on one ground. But when you come to Nigeria, where the gap between the have and the have-not has widened immeasurably, you can't just talk about child's rights. You must be talking about the rights of children vis-a-vis class issues. Class. So you talk about the issue of child marriage. For example, child marriage is not a cultural matter, no matter how much you argue. It's not a religious matter. It's not an environmental matter. It's a class matter. Is it because I will prove it to you? There's no child who comes from a rich home in the north where child marriage is perennial. There's no child who comes from a political class or the ruling elites whose father is a minister or the father or the mother is a commissioner or a local government chairman or even a councillor. In Damaturu, there's no child from that class of citizens whose children can be married out. It's not possible. They send their children to the highest, give their children the highest education possible. They send their children to Ivy League universities. And when the children return, they celebrate what class wedding ceremonies that we all see. If it is true that it's a religious matter, if it's a cultural matter, how come the children of the senators are not married at 13 or 12? That is a class issue. Now, the operating system there is poverty. Now, I live in Magodo. Where I live, there's no child of resident here who is in child labor. It's not possible. Who will be hawking? Every child is at peace to a very large extent. Now, I'm talking about social issues. Now, I'm not talking about domestic abuse and all of that. And I want to focus more on social issues as an advocacy point. Now, there's no child here in Magodo where I live, Magodo Jare, phase 2 here where I live, who is hawking. The children that are hawking are the children of walls of wood and dross of water, the oi polloi, the wretched of the earth. Those are the children you find on the street hawking. So the children who are from the lower crust of society, they are the ones. So the question today is this: what accrues to a child for being a Nigerian? What accrues? So you look at the children from the lower crust. The children from the lower crust, the existence of their parents are already abused. The existence of their parents are abused. When 92 million Nigerians are living in extreme poverty, now note, I'm not talking about those who are living in poverty. Nigeria is supposedly 200 million people. 92 million, according to Global Poverty Watch, is living in extreme poverty. We overtook India. We overtook India in the highest number of poor people in the world. We overtook India just this year or late last year in the highest number of under 5 deaths in the world. So when we are talking about citizenship now, we are saying, okay, what accrues to a child? For the children of the lower class, the poor, they can't fend for themselves, not to talk of fending for their children. That is why International Labour Organization, since 2010, said the solution to child labor was social protection. The question is, what is the social investment? What is social impact measurement when it comes to Nigeria? What is the budget for education, for healthcare, for shelter, for food, for all of these things? What is the budget? Now, when you now go to the children of the upper crust have taken responsibility for everything government should take responsibility for. Public schools are not working. Private schools have taken over. Public hospitals are not working. Private hospitals have taken over. Public shelter is not working. Private shelter has taken over. Public food, nutrition, food security is not working. There's no private arrangement. I'm supposed to speak for 10 minutes. If you're not comfortable with my conversation, you can well say so. I can end up in 2 minutes. I can end up in 2 minutes, except you mute me. I've not even spoken for 5 minutes. So let me try and find a common. So the rich have taken responsibility for their own children. So the common conclusion is that there's no child in Nigeria today who enjoys the right of being a citizen. So what has happened is that those children are now citizens of their parents who can fend for them, or citizens of their parents who cannot fend for them. If they are children of their citizens that can fend for them, they go to school, they eat well, they clothe well, they find security for them. Children go to school these days in bulletproof cars for those who can afford it. And for those who cannot afford it, they don't go to school, they don't feed, they don't do all of that. So the conversation at the end of the day is that I have been in this area of advocating for the rights of children for 21 years. I work with UNICEF, British Council, SOS Students Village International, Google, Facebook, every international and local organization that matter. My conversation with them today is that we cannot continue to talk about the rights of children in Nigeria without talking about Nigeria. How come Nigeria has collected aid from UNICEF, from British Council, from all over the world? Now we're not collecting from China. How come all the aids we have collected have not fixed the lives of our children? It has not worked. AIDS has not worked. The way forward is not aid. It's not for us to commit the lives of our children as orphans to donor agencies. Now, this is the issue. We have enough to take care of our children here instead of going to donor agencies, going capital. So in conclusion, this is my chat to you. Law is an instrument of social change. I didn't bother to talk about Child's Rights Act, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Constitution of Nigeria, because the learned and erudite speakers that have gone before have done that. And I think that it should be like a relay race. So you pass the baton. That's why I'm focusing on the social angle. And so I conclude by saying that number one, we must recognize who are the people responsible for rights of children. Number one is that you must recognize that the family is there. But the family is number one, but the family cannot be all. The family needs social protection, empowerment. There's no nation on earth where only the family is responsible for protecting children or parenting them. Number two, the community. In the community, we have the international, in the community, we have the media. In the community, we have neighbors, we have churches, we have mosques, we have media, we have people like the organization who commendably is taking on this task to speak about this matter. You are part of the community. What you are doing is a duty. Number four is the state. The state has a responsibility to create a level playing field for the protection of the rights of our children, creating social amenities, creating social protection. Then the international community. But I want you to know, as I told UNICEF in 2010 at the program that we have, I told them, I said, look, you bring these international guys to come and talk to us about the rights of our children. And the fact that we can reach out to international organizations when we have crisis as Nigeria. I said, yes, I agree with you. But let me tell you that international organizations always pander around interest. There was a crisis in Egypt within a short time because of interest. The crisis in Egypt, the crisis in Libya, it was not difficult for the international organization under NATO to intervene, declare no war zone. But for over 5 years now, there have been crises in Syria. UNICEF is there. The Red Cross is there. All the international organizations are there. How come they've not been able to declare no-fly zone in Syria? How come? How come they did not respond in Bosnia and Herzegovina? For 30 months, they could not do anything. How come they did not respond in Rwanda? For us to continue to put our salvation in the hands of international organization is to be in an island, what do you call it now? Wandering island. So my charge was this is, our salvation will continue to be in our hands. As lawyers, if we are lawyers here, and if you are not a lawyer, Alexander Sakwara Williams, the first lawyer, the first indigenous Nigerian lawyer said, a legal practitioner lives for the direction of his country and the advancement of the cause of his people. I want to charge you today, guys, that we must arise and be interested in fixing this country. All that I've spoken about are ingredients that we can take on board in having conversation in fixing this country. The conversation about children, about women, must be a component in the conversation to fix Nigeria. It cannot be had in isolation. So don't make it an ambition to change the world. The world is a massive place. If I were you, I will focus on my continent. Don't even make it an ambition to change your continent. If I were you, I will focus on my country, Nigeria. Don't even make your ambition to change Nigeria. I think you should focus on your state. Don't even make it an ambition to change your state. I think you should focus on your local government. Don't even make it an ambition to change your local government. I think you should focus on your street. Don't even make it an ambition to change your street. I think you should focus on your building. Don't even make it an ambition to change your building. I think you should focus on your room. Don't even make it an ambition to change your room. I think you should focus on your bed. Don't even make it an ambition to change your bed. I think you should focus on your best space. Don't even make it an ambition to change your best space. I think you should focus on yourself. When you change, your best space will change. When your best space changes, your bed will change. When your bed changes, your room will change. When your room changes, your building will change. When your building changes, your local government will change. When your local government changes, your state will change. When your state changes, your country will change. When your country changes, your continent will change. When your continent changes, your world will change. That means you are the change we are waiting for. We need to fix Nigeria, and it has to begin from you so that the rights of our children can be respected, our women can be treated as dignified human beings, not as second-rate citizens. God bless you. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for that very passionate presentation. It was very rich and very, very enlightening. So I quickly move on to Mrs. Cordelia Eke. Please go ahead with your presentation now.
Okay. Well, the good thing about speaking when you have a lot of erudite persons having spoken before you is that the work is relatively easy. And in this particular instance, I find that I have very little to do, starting from the presentation, after the presentation of the learned Monday Obani. So I will just add a few things to what has been said already, so that we all can also make progress, maybe a different, slightly different perspective. Now, first, I want to agree with the previous speakers that we are not in need of, we do not lack laws in Nigeria with regards to children and women. We don't lack laws. We have the legislation. Nigeria is signatory to a lot of international instruments, and they have tried to domesticate a number of them. The Child Rights Act is major when it concerns children. It actually makes provisions, a lot of details in the Child Rights Act. We also have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act that is also there. We have a lot of legislation. Even our Constitution in itself has enough provisions concerning the fundamental rights of women and children as human beings in society. Now, what is the problem? Why do we still find ourselves where we are? First, I must say that crisis is a global issue. Of course, it's not in one man's house only. So the problem that affects women and children in times of crisis is a global issue. The speakers before me have also mentioned, some places. I think Mr. Kinlami, actually elaborated a lot on that. So it is not something that it's just about Nigeria. But the important thing is, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with these situations? And what can you do when the rights of women and children are being violated? The law is there. The laws are there. So what are you supposed to do? Starting from the children, I'd want to say that the Child Rights Act sees all children as equal. In spite of the social issues we have, there really is no dichotomy with respect to who is a child and whether it's social strata and all that. It's really not there. So it is the human beings, people in society that have created this dichotomy. We've created this social strata for ourselves, and it treats some children in certain ways while others, are treated in different ways. So moving forward, I think it's something that has to do with both government, the individuals, organizations. We all have a role to play to ensure that the rights of women and children are protected in the society. What can be done? That's where I want to focus now. What can be done? Now, we'll go first to the Child Rights Act, talking about children's rights. Of course, we are all aware now that the Child Rights Act has not been adopted by a lot of states. And I dare say a lot of those states are in the northern part of the country. And many of us will be aware of the reasons, because some of it has to do with religious reasons. By so doing, it makes it difficult to enforce the provisions of the Child Rights Act in those states. So offenses in the Child Rights Act are not regarded as offenses in those states. Now, that Child Rights Act looks at a child as anyone below the age of 18. But if you live in an environment that permits child marriage before that age, child marriage at the age of puberty, when a girl attains puberty, if that environment permits it, and there is no law against it in that environment, it means that a crime will be committed against that child daily, regularly, and there's nothing that can be done about it because they have refused to adopt the law that speaks against it. So that is one of the issues. Now, so we need to advocate. There needs to be more pressure, more advocacy by NGOs for the adoption of the Child Rights Act by all the states. I know there are some provisions in the Child Rights Act that are not available in the criminal code or even in the penal code. They are not available in other laws. So with the Child Rights Act, it actually gives you a wider range of offenses you can prosecute for, that it concerns children. So that advocacy is important. There should also be more advocacy for the adoption of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, because there are also a lot of offenses there concerning women and children, and not even limited to the female gender. For example, rape it has been expanded. The definition of rape has been expanded by the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. So it is not specific to the female organs, the reproductive organs of the female anymore, which means rape can now be applied even to the male gender. It gives more room for prosecution of such cases and enforcement of the rights of these children. So there should be more advocacy also for the adoption of the VAP Act, which a lot of states are yet to adopt. Now, we should also talk about now prosecution. A lot of the violence, a lot of the abuse of the rights of children, even women suffered, a lot of them are actually captured in the law. There are laws that define these activities as criminal activities. They are crimes. They are offenses that can be prosecuted. So why don't we have more prosecution of these crimes? Children are abducted. Children are kidnapped. Children are exposed to the media. Look, a lot of the time, the dignity of the child is being violated, even by the way media reports cases concerning children. There's a lot of education that is needed by people in the media, because they expose these children unduly in the cause of trying to report their cases. I had to read an article. I read an article somewhere concerning the case I had prosecuted, and I saw the name of the child written plainly on that article. I saw it on the internet, and it was really sad, because that is also another form of abuse of the child. So we need to have a lot more education, the media on how to protect the rights of children. Okay, so I said I was going to deal more with suggestions, what can be done. Now we find that there is displacement in times of crisis. This crisis, of course, can be communal clashes. It can be cultism. Due to cultism, of course, the wars, invasions, we have these herdsmen issues, we have, the Boko Haram attacks, all are there. But in times of crisis, humanitarian crisis, of course, is there, and then displacements. People go to temporary shelters. Can we, in preparing these shelters, take particular interest in making provision for children and women? When they design such shelters, right from the point of designing these shelters, there are special needs that children and women have. So can we put that into consideration? When policies are being made, can we advocate for these policies to have the interests of the children? The Child Rights Act says the interest of a child must be paramount in all decisions that have been taken. So we need to shout, we need to scream, we need to lobby, we need to advocate for the inclusion, for the interests of the children to be included in policy making, in planning by government, right from the legislature and the executive. So that's part of the role the NGOs can play, even the media houses can play. So from that point, you have these things being taken care of. We need trained personnel to take care of children and adult needs. Now, the Child Rights Act provides for special units in the police force, a special unit to take care of children. We have that in our police stations. So these laws, even for states that have adopted these laws, the Child Rights Act, a lot of the institutions are not there. So we need to advocate for the institutions provided for in this law to be made available, to be functional. Those that are supposed to supervise, are they supervising? Are they monitoring the enforcement of the rights of the children? This is what you and I can do as part of our contribution, to protection of the rights of children. Now, psychological development of the child, that's another thing. Children face a lot of trauma. Imagine those that have been kidnapped and rescued. I haven't heard that there's trauma counseling, debriefing of these children. They have gone through a lot of trauma, and for some of them, it's going to stay with them for years. It affects their development, their mental development. So these are things we should not undermine the effect of psychology, the psychological effect of the trauma and crisis period on children. Same goes for women. So mental health issues start that way. Depression is a killer. So there has to be provision for all that when we are talking about taking care of children and women. Their health care is paramount. So just to move quickly, we also need to look at the enforcement of fundamental rights. That's straightforward enough. A lot of the rights abuse can be enforced. They're fundamental rights enforcement procedure rules. But how many persons are enforcing these rights? Some people are not aware of the method, how they should go about it. But there can be class actions. That's where we see activists, CSOs, and other NGOs should take up class action on behalf of these people whose rights are being abused in order to enforce their rights. And interestingly, there is a provision in the Child Rights Act concerning enforcement of the rights of the child. I think that is this section 17 or so of the Child Rights Act gives section 17 of the Act. And now it says a child may bring an action for damages against a person for harm or injury caused the child willfully, recklessly, negligently, or through neglect. Now, this is interesting. This is before, during, or after the birth of a child. So an unborn child also has rights to enforce, can also enforce his rights. Now, do we know these things? Where are the people taking it up? Are parents suing on behalf of their children? What of guardians? What of NGOs and CSOs? So we can do a lot of talking about these rights, but we need action. We need enforcement. And some people must drive the enforcement. Now, let me talk a bit about prosecution. In rounding up, prosecuting these offenses. There are a lot of offenses that are reported. Some crimes are reported. The prosecutor, the state takes it up. You go to court, but nobody shows up. Where are the complainants? Nobody shows up. The state counsel or the prosecutor will not enter the witness box to give evidence. It's sad that there are cases I have lost because I do not have witnesses. Sometimes, the complaint is that they are threatened. Some is indigent, of course. Poverty comes to play. They don't have transport to come from where they are. Sometimes nobody is there to bring the child to court. Nobody is involved. All settlements, people take peanuts to settle cases concerning children. They take peanuts. And that's because of poverty again. So at the end of the day, these cases go to court. Some of them, the few that manage to go to court, they don't get prosecuted. They get prosecuted, but they never get to a logical conclusion because they are struck out halfway. The prosecution does not have witnesses. So there is need for us to find out the details, the problems. Let NGOs do a bit more research. They should even partner with government. Yes, there's a lot government is supposed to do, but the government cannot do it all. We have NGOs, we have corporate bodies. They should make it part of their corporate social responsibility to assist some of the institutions that are responsible for protecting the rights of children and the rights of women. I also join others in commending Esquire for bringing this topic to light. You are also doing your part, but we work in different organizations. We can do more. There should be a victims fund. There should be, social amenities provided. You have a feeder, you have Aula. They are doing their bit. I was speaking with the chairperson of FIDA in one of the states just a few days ago, and she lamented they have a shelter being run by the state FIDA, but it's a problem to feed the children. It's difficult to provide for their clothing. There's a lot they need. Government does what it can, but there's more to be done. So it doesn't take us so much to once in a while just give up something to charity and identify the charities that are actually working. Because when you have children in areas that are prone to violence, you want to take them out. You must have a shelter where you take them to. If you don't have a shelter, the children remain there and they just get used to, unfortunately, they get used to the environment of abuse and conflict and violence. So everyone that's participating in this seminar, in this webinar, can be a part of making things better for children in the society. NGOs, keep talking. What we enjoyed today is because some people were talking years back. Some people went on protests. Some people went in the media, different places. Women went on the streets to canvass for their rights. We know about women's riots. We know there's so many in the days of old, even people in the communities. So why can't we stand up now and do the same thing? We elected people in government. So we have the power to also make the government do what we want. Through advocacy, through lobbying, through campaigns, publications. Let's not sit in our comfort zones and listen to discussions and talks and then go back, continue with what we are doing. We never know whose roof the rain will fall on next. Sometimes we do not feel the pain of others until it gets close to you. So let us try now to create an enabling environment so that these problems don't come to you or your relative or your friends. Because you see, the women even for the men are involved in this because they're your daughters, they're your sisters, they're your mothers, they're wives, they're girlfriends. So it is not just a discussion that should be left for women. I'm glad we have so many men that are passionate, passionately speaking about this topic today. So I beg of you, let this conversation continue. Let us look for practical ways to do something to change the narrative concerning women and children. And let me, a final word, please, for international donors. When you donate these funds, please monitor implementation. Let it not just be releasing funds to states or to organizations and letting it be, you just wait for reports at the end of the day. No, monitor implementation. Statistics, what have you done with this fund for this period? Before we give you another set of funds, there should be statistics and there should be tangible progress being made. In all, I want to thank everyone again for being part of this webinar. It shows that you are interested in what we are discussing. Please, let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep the flag flying. Let us protect the women, protect the children. It's going to make the society a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Eke. Thank you for that lovely presentation. Our time is fast spent, so we can't even go beyond this time now. But Mr. Ubani, one of the participants has requested for your presentation. So if you would make that available to us, we'll be able to forward it to the participants, to all the attendees for today.
I promise to do that. I promise to send the soft copy to you.
Okay, thank you.
So you can send it to him. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers today, Mrs. Cordelia Ike, Mr. Monde Ubani, Mr. Taiwo Akinlami, Mrs. Akinlami, Mrs. Nkechi Onyeso. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, Mr. Jite was not able to make the webinar today, but the conversation has been very rich and it has been very interesting. This conversation, like all our speakers have said, is not a one-time conversation. It is a conversation that has to continue. And I like what Mr. Taiwo said. He said, you have to start from yourself. It is when you are starting from yourself that you can even think of changing the world. You can't think of changing the world and then you have not worked on yourself. You have to start from yourself, and which just makes us realize that we all have a part to play in the protection of the rights of children and women. We all have our own parts to play. And like Mrs. Eke also reiterated, she talked about how the society comes into ensuring that some of these laws that we have are not just paper laws, but that they are enforced. Because like she said, and like Mr. Ubani also listed, we have a lot of laws. And there is no doubt about that. We have a lot of laws, but the problem we have is there is no implementation. She talked about the fact that when it's time to prosecute a matter, there are no witnesses in court. And if there are no witnesses, how would there be a conviction? Of course, there can't be a conviction without witnesses. So I think when the society decides to play its part, and then we are not turning a blind eye, we are not closing our eyes to to the problems that we are seeing in our environment. If we all play our parts as a society, and then when we look at customs and the practices that are discriminating against women and children, and we speak up against them, these are things that can help us in this fight, against the discrimination, against the trampling upon the rights of children and women, not just in crisis, but also in our society as a whole. So thank you all so much for being a part of this webinar. I will hand over now to Chidima to do the closing and to do the necessary announcements. Thank you all so much.
So I must say this has really been a very rich and insightful session. Thank you so much to our moderator, Mr. Solanke. Thank you to all our panelists, Mrs. Cordelia Ike, Mr. Monday Ubani, Mr. Taiwa Kilami, and Mrs. Chilren. So, like our moderator said, we are so sorry for the speaker that was unable to show up today. Thank you also to our attendees for joining today's session. A very big sponsor to a very big thank you, to our sponsors, Alex, GLIS, Bloomfield Law Practice, and Advocate Law Practice for making this webinar possible today. Our next webinar session will be on Wednesday, 31st of March by 1 p.m. and it's going to be on real estate joint ventures. So you can't afford to miss it. Please do join us by 1 p.m. on Wednesday to take part in this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do have a lovely day.